Making a video. Yeah, it's really loud. Really loud. Anyway. Yeah, it's really loud. Cicadas. Anyway, so there's a couple of videos. And I guess I'll play one of them. I mean, half of it anyway. LudditeReturns. So made a lot of general, casual arguments. And I just think this is sort of important. I mean, there's lots of arguments here explaining why life has some problems. There's some problems with this mechanism. There's some problems with the way we engage in living. And some of them are foundational. They're made out of the basic core, the roots, the foundation of what life is and how it functions and what are its capabilities in this world. And so we have this phenomenon of consciousness. So that brings me to Antikontavad, who made a video, again, just in some sort of loose, casual way, describing some sort of, some sort of magicness or impressiveness. That's, some sort of, fundamental, like just being conscious itself, like it has some sort of huge potential to do some kind of thing. And it's like, but yeah, that's only the casual impression. If you dig deeper, and you'll see how much of that is unravelable, how much of that is just ourselves, aggrandizing ourselves, consciousness, using the faculty of consciousness to basically, sell consciousness as an idea. We're impressing what? What's the judge that we're impressing? I guess it's a more important way to say it. Who's judging how impressive it is, or how functional or useful it is? Somebody who actually understands, or somebody who doesn't. That's sort of an important distinction between a qualified opinion and an unqualified opinion. You can impress people with very little sometimes. And some shiny beads, have purchased whole continents. These people thought they were something when they were nothing. Anyway, that's really not the point I want to make. So going back to Luddite's video, one of these stumbling blocks is this distinction made between suffering, the negative parts of life, the unpleasant parts, and the value of the fun parts, the conquesting, successful, good times, and that somehow we're not treating them the same, and therefore committed some sort of crime against them by making distinctions. And I would argue that the distinctions are totally appropriate, that they are different things, that desire is different than fear, fundamentally. And we can see it in the way we, how these emotions, these psychological mechanisms manifest. You can see the differences in terms of how we enjoy or not enjoy them, and how we react to them as mechanisms of learning, even what we take from them as experiences. And so desire is really what it comes down to, right? We're sort of in the argument that sorry. Yeah, I did take a few notes, but yeah, it's really not working out. So okay, let's just give the given is the bad experiences are bad fundamentally, just by in and of themselves. It's just bad. We can know that. Now the question is what value are the goods? So it sort of gets back to this bad apple scenario. One bad apple ruins the pie. That you can put a whole bunch of good stuff in a pie. But if you put one big poisonous ball apple in there, it's kind of just going to pollute the whole game. So it's like, one man's meat can't cure another man of poisoning. You being happy doesn't make somebody else unhappy or uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. Who's uncomfortable? Your comfort doesn't fix that problem. You're saying it compensates, and I'm saying I don't think it can compensate, because I don't think, again, the argument is that pleasure is kind of a less real thing than the suffering. And we can sort of see it in examples, use these metaphors to make it kind of illustratable. But that, the cost is higher. There's a higher currency. And to some point, I would even argue the more extreme position that pleasure is in fact used up by the person enjoying it. That if you're enjoying a pleasure, it's usually because you've been extracted from something that wasn't pleasurable. So you're satisfying a negative condition, and enjoying the result of removing the negative condition. And so it's sort of like the argument is that we're sort of born into that behavior. We're born wanting, needing the deprivated, and the struggle is to satisfy the deprivation. And that the reward for that is psychologically conditioning, and that it makes you think that there's some real positive value when all you're really doing is unraveling your own negative values. The negative that exists inside of you is being circumcised or eviscerated, and that's the only real value. So you've sort of used up the positive value by enjoying the positive value, and it's not really something that can be used to trade in an exchange, barter for the real negatives that exist, and that's just the truth. And so he's still not playing with the exact metaphors that are provided. So if I argue that if you had to buy your pleasures with the real pains of a lifetime, that it wouldn't be, most people wouldn't buy much. Okay, there wouldn't be much they would be willing if they knew in advance. And so that's part of the argument here, is he'll keep arguing that most people do this and most people do that, most people think. And I guess the key argument is no, most people don't think. Most people don't have a complete perspective. Certainly most breeders don't have a complete perspective. They breed from a position of strength and indestructibility with very little humility. And that if they really had to breed later in life, at the end of life, with that brain might be a lot less willing to play with this fire, because it would have the context that, you have to pay for your life. It will be expensive, sometimes preposterously expensive, but you're going to pay for it. And that's sort of significant, very significant. But anyway, we'll get back to that later and such. And I should run a little. I did find out that, saw my doctor every couple of years, and what I might have is a migraine disorder. Apparently you can have migraine headaches without the actual headache. You just have all the other bad shit. And look at all these holes. Really is amazing amount of release points, for a hard walking path. You just migrate over here, there's none. Just right in the path, which is weird. Anyway, it's been 17 years crawling about under a path. Kind of weird. Anyway, they must have really liked that tree back there. The roots anyway. So anyway, um, just, you know, the noise is, yeah, it's really a lot of noise. Anyway, I'll add something onto this, no doubt, and something, whatever, blah, blah, blah. The next, alright, add-on video. I'll play some of the Luddite video just to, you know, verify that this is what he's talking about. So the first, whatever, 5 minutes wasn't really terribly useful. Just more of the same, they're wrong, negative, something, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, let me get to it.
Futility. Like, it seemed to fly over in Mendham's head, I suppose, that I was trying to clarify a kind of irony. I mean, I wasn't really saying that antinatalism is futile. Rather that...
Or whatever. Yeah, it was in the title of the video. Yeah, well, so what? Again, there is no hypocrisy. Okay? I'm not life on Earth. Activities I might do, some political agenda I might have, isn't life on Earth. Okay? It's a response to life on Earth. It's a response to the fact that there are sentient beings being manipulated by crude forces. And so, yes, I fight for adding something less crude as a force of manipulation, of control, of determination. And that activity is intrinsically, fundamentally different than the activity of the universe. Yeah.
So quick to say, well, what we're doing is not futile, but everything else is ad hoc, right?
Well, everything else is not the comment, okay? If you want to go out and help somebody, you know, you want to help old ladies cross the street, no efilist is going to say bad idea. But if you want to create old ladies, you want to make new people and shove them into the street, yeah, then you're going to get some critique, and someone might ask you, why are you exposing another victim to potential harm? What's going to be accomplished? It just seems like a terribly selfish, pointless act. Why are you doing it? Is this too much for you? Somebody's asking you, why are you doing that?
But this is a feature of much of antinatalism. Well, suffering has real value, but everything else, nah.
Well, again, I see, but that, you know, you just aren't dealing with the argument that founds that, okay? There is an argument that desire and fear are two different mechanisms. And that one has a lot more credibility than the other. And it just happens that suffering works the same way, essentially. The suffering is absolutely bad, always, you know, in the context of it in and of itself, where the pleasure is sort of dependent on the hunger thing existing, pre-existing condition. You have to have a pre-existing need to be pleased.
It's just the illusion of value. What the fuck? I mean, this is problematic ontologically, this is problematic epistemologically. How can you justify such things? Empirically?
Well, it's been explained. The justification is because we're biological organisms designed to play a stupid game. And the only way you get things to play a stupid game is to give them some sort of candy or reward. And that our psychology has created those mechanisms to make us do things that are illogical and stupid. It just has. It's given us the mechanism. You know, much of what we do, if we didn't have a desire to do it, we wouldn't do it because, we said, oh, look at it, it's just so logical to do. No. You do it because you are motivated by this consumption, reproduction, and this addiction, ego, ambition mechanism. And it makes you do things. It makes you think those things are worth doing. But they're not really worth doing. They're just silly notions in your head.
No. A priori, no. It's ad hoc, man.
Well, again, ad hoc, man. Well, again, we can understand the difference between you jumping into a fire to rescue a kitten in distress, you know, as a motivation, and you eating a candy bar. These are two different kinds of things that people do. There's one thing where the desire or the need to do it is entirely inside of you, and there's another thing where the need or the necessity is in the world itself. The world itself is improved by the action.
Anyway, at least in my opinion, I don't to speak of meaningfulness and futility in terms of function. That's another thing that, like, functionality, I don't think is appropriate relative to meaningfulness.
Well, I don't know. Obviously, I think it is. It's a function has a correlation to value. I mean, you can't kind of separate the two. Something has to, a good nuclear power plant, a functioning one, is better than a non-functioning one. And the reason is because of its implication on all these sentient creatures, blah, blah, blah. Again, we have a function in the sense that we do affect sentience. We are a sentient. We create a value state inside of our own consciousness, and we affect other consciousnesses and their value states. And again, I've argued that, we do this, humans have done this traditionally in a very stupid manner because they don't really recognize that their selfish motivations are purely that, selfish, and that the only thing that really matters is the impact on all pawns, not just one pawn. I mean, you can't navigate life yourself. You navigate life existing with all these other selves, and you can't negatively impact them and have a functioning, successful life. It will be a failed life if you cost more than you return.
Functionality, well, I'll put it this way. The nature of what existentialists call the absurd is there's a kind of contradiction in the experience of man. Man demands meaning and doesn't find it in the universe.
Well, again, we can find it in the universe. Like I said, you don't need to step any further than consciousness itself. The fact that it is in different states. It can be in states that are horrible and states that are not horrible. What more do you need to establish? I don't need to establish anything more than that. And I've established meaning, significance, relevance, importance. The fact that there are two different value states, dramatically different, now we have enough. You can build on that if you want, but I'm just saying right there's enough to say there's meaning. And so now function is dictated by how you implicate these sentient beings in their welfare state. And the simple argument being made is that this thing, these machines that we are, can only run on a fuel. And the fuel is always going to be more expensive than anything they can produce. And that the only thing they can produce to maximize their production, they can help the other machines in distress. But the other machines in distress should have never been in distress in the first place. They should have never been put in jeopardy in the first place. So again, you can contrive added value to your life to make it good, but you can only do that because somebody else made a mess first. Somebody else made the bad for you to fix.
Contradictory state. But this is the condition of possibility, of freedom, of freely choosing, I suppose, what one is to be.
Yeah, well, that doesn't even make any sense. So I'm not going to go through the whole determinism arguments and all that kind of stuff, but there's none of this freedom crap. The important thing, I guess, to say was whether you're being bound by biology or being bound by the limitations of our knowledge base. Maybe bound by logic rather than bound by selfish desire. I mean, what binds us? What defines the dimensions of our essence and being? It's going to be this, garbage in, garbage out scenario. You got to put good stuff in to get good stuff out. Good stuff has to be put in. You can't put it in. It comes in.
Right? Like, if man had a kind of objective function, this would be in itself quite horrifying.
Well, you say it would be horrifying. I'm just saying I could come up with an objective function. Like I said, the universe has a beating heart, and it feels bad if it has a hole in its vessel, and we plug the hole. Therefore, we're good. I mean, obviously, it has to be a scenario where you create another vulnerable population that needs help for us to have a purpose. But I'm just saying it wouldn't be disappointing to know that we're solving a problem. it would be disappointing that there would be some other problem in the universe that needed solving. That would be horrific. I suppose. So I suppose in a way you're conceding the argument that the only way we could have a function is there'd have to be something broken in the universe, and we'd have to somehow be the fix. We'd have to be the pill, the medicine. Uh, that's always going to be the scenario, because it is almost impossible to even conceive of this thing that could possibly be good without there being a hunger for it. There has to be a hunger first. There has to be a need. And unfortunately, that's what we create, is need. I mean, this is a really important aspect to this whole conversation, is recognition of the fact that that's what we do. We create need. I mean, maybe we resolve some need while we exist, but the argument being made is that overall, it seems quite obvious that the scales have more unresolved need than resolved need.
It would be somewhat akin to where the function is the puppeteer, function's the puppeteer, and we're kind of the puppets on strings.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, isn't that always going to be part of the rules of the play, though? You're always going to be an actor in a sense. You're always going to have to act in a world that has those limitations. I mean, what would this thing called an absolute freedom? What shape could that possibly take? I don't think you can point to anything that would define it or describe it. So why even have the ambition that you think you can obtain it? And for what purpose? You don't need it. You'd have to contrive the need for it.
Right? If it were obvious. And then to say, well, the only function of value is the reduction of suffering. I just don't agree. I mean, reflect upon your own experience.
Yeah, I have done that extensively. The argument I'm making is that this is not a critical point, so I'm going to establish that in the first place. I don't need to prove that all happiness is crap to prove that on balance we're always going to run a huge deficit. It's almost impossible not to run a huge deficit in terms of the weight of the negative versus the value of the positive, the positive weight. But acknowledge the fact that I have made extensive arguments explaining that the truth is that we really don't know that bliss is maybe just being liberated from our burdens, that it is in fact burden that always is with us, burdens of insecurity, burdens of insufficiency, burdens of not having enough, wanting more, needing more, and that prevents us, even physical stresses, physical miseries that are always there, and we're just not actively conscious of them. And our body, our brain, our mechanism uses periodic relief from that to give us the illusion of pleasure, of true gain. But all we've done is dig our way out of encumbrance, of confinement. And I don't think it's not a theory you can just dismiss out of hand. You have to make an argument dismissing it. And I don't think you really can, because I think it just happens to be the truth, that that's the mechanism of desire. It's using the ability to acclimate us to a negative state and make us think that's a neutral, when in fact it is decidedly negative. It's just less negative than worse. Our psychology is motivated by that, by thinking, by understanding relative position. That's what our psychology does. It migrates the goalpost based on a relative comparison, and that's not that's psychology, and it's a manipulation of the reality. And the reality is that it's just fooling you. You're always in a negative state. You're always minus bliss. You're always minus. and you just have the illusion that you can gain by becoming less negative. It is a real gain. Less negative is a real gain. But it's an illusion to think that it's a real gain. Real in the world.
So me thinking, am I defined by trying not to suffer? The idea is so absurd and silly to me.
Well, I don't think it really is. I think you would admit that most of how you function is controlled by understanding not getting run over, don't get hurt, don't get sick, don't do this, don't do that. I mean, you probably have a ton of rules about how you live your life. You don't go around licking sidewalks or eating gum off the sidewalk or doing a lot of things because you know it's just going to make you sick or it's going to jeopardize your comfort in some way. So, yeah, a huge part of how you live your life will be based on understanding what will get you not uncomfortable, preventing yourself from being put in discomfortable circumstances. So I just don't know. I don't think if somebody followed you around every day, I think they could write in a notebook that most of the actions you do could be qualified as avoidance of problems, that you are avoiding trouble.
This is what defines me. That I don't suffer. I mean, relative to other values, right? So I cannot suffer or suffer great. I cannot suffer and be a sniveling coward, a lying piece of shit, and not suffer, or suffer greatly and be a man of integrity, of honesty, and so on. Right?
Yeah, well, I mean, what good does a man of integrity? Again, that's almost a joke because what in this world, in a world of shit, there's no. You might as well be an albino or something. There's no point in being that unlike the rest of the human race. So this integrity thing is a little hard to find. I certainly concede your point. I mean, I'm not going to say that I would, if I had to choose, that I would accept being an asshole, what I consider to be an asshole, without being willing to pay some price to avoid being an asshole. So, yeah, give me some suffering to avoid that. But this idea that there's any value in this torment to realize a simple truth, again, integrity isn't a very accomplished thing. It's so freaking simple in so many ways. You're almost saying, what, you have to actually suffer to get there? Is that how selfish and greedy and gluttonous we are by nature? Is that it takes hard work to make that simple realization? To recognize that, it doesn't matter whether I have a broken leg or you have a broken leg, that it's the broken leg that's the enemy? I mean, that kind of integrity, logical integrity, should require some kind of huge price to be paid in terms of some kind of suffering? I don't think it should.
Creative, or what have you. And it seems a bit odd, I suppose, for Minham. I mean, purely descriptive, right? To say, well, if you had two piles of all the good and all the bad, and you had to pay for the good with the bad, then most people wouldn't, do that. But this is exactly what people have been doing for centuries.
Well, see, that's what I'm saying. Most people haven't been doing that for centuries. Okay? They don't have it put in front of them. They have it put behind them. That's the way it works. They don't get to see ahead of time what's coming and then try to avoid it. No, they just have to deal with it falling on them, and then they do the struggle, get the weight off me thing, and you're assuming because they push the thing off of themselves that they intend to live. No, they intend not to have the weight on them or to be crushed or to be harmed. So we will fight to protect the biology. That's you can't even argue that that's not a mechanism built into us. The adrenaline, the shit will kick in and you will fight. And you're not going to do it logically, though. You're going to do it because of fear and because of apprehensions about what it means to be harmed further. And to avoid further harm, you're going to fight hard. But again, no, the replication that takes place doesn't take place in the mature. It doesn't take place in the more thoughtful, the ones that the individuals with more perspective, the ones who have seen how dirty the road can get, how bad it can be. So I don't think your argument is fair. People haven't chosen, okay, and especially they haven't chosen in the sense that what philosophical notions did they have running through their head? Value equations. They had notions of gods and hopes and all this other stuff driven into them. Even now on YouTube, somebody says something a little bit dark and everybody starts suffocating all over the place and buck up and calling people wimps and cowards. You just did. You called them use the word coward. You use this rhetoric to humiliate them into, yeah, buck up, buck up, buck up, keep fighting, keep fighting, keep fighting, because you're so afraid of the darkness. You're so afraid of the good night rolling in. And you won't give up, and you won't give up, and you won't give up, and you think that's a philosophy. I don't think that's a philosophy. I think that's a psychology. Screaming.
Since the beginning. I mean, there's no new revelation here. I mean, people have been intimately acquainted with their own suffering, from the beginning, I suppose.
And they haven't been acquainted with any kind of real ability to make real choices about what kind of game they would play. If they knew what the real story was, if they could see the whole thing played out as a movie or whatever, and see what tragic end they're going to come to and what assholes their kids are going to be and all of that crap, there's probably plenty of them, a ton of them, that would say, yeah, let's not bother writing that one in ink. Okay, I saw the pencil drawing. Yeah, don't ink that thing. That is one ugly anus. Okay, find something else to draw. Because, yeah, let's not do that. Because that ain't good.
That they wouldn't do that, right? And that's what people have been doing. That's what people are doing.
Well, again, you're just ignoring the thought experiment. Of course, they haven't been doing that. They haven't had to face it in front of them. They haven't had to pick it up in front of them and say, yes, to have this, I will accept that. They haven't had to directly pay for any of it. The payment has never been associated directly with the gain, and all they've been running on in the game is desire and fear of alternative, which doesn't seem very good. Dying doesn't sound like a good time.
Is probably what people will do until the whole thing comes to an end. Well, they're just addicts. I mean, that same thing.
They're reckless addicts. Yeah. Again, are you going to deny it? I mean, look, they've already statistically proven this stuff in India on populations of, hundreds of thousands of people. And every year you delay having the first baby knocks babies off the list. I mean, it just dramatically reduces how many kids somebody's going to have. So the smarter you make them, the less kids they're going to have. The more you give them a life, the less they're going to choose to impose life. So, these are real equations. I don't know if these are philosophical arguments, but I think some of it has an understanding, a humility. The longer you live, the more humble you're going to be.
I mean, at this point, that's really, but I'm the elite. And Mayhem takes swaths of humanity, well, their own evaluation of their lives or of the nature of the game is of no account.
Well, it just isn't. It's not of any account like here's an authority, popularity. It's not an authority. So, yeah, I'm going to argue that philosophies have to individually fight for their integrity and their trueness and their value and their quality. They don't just get to say, we're the majority, we win. That doesn't work philosophically. You got to make the argument. So I'm just saying that the fact that most people have some wacky notion in their head, I'm going to call it what it is. It's a wacky notion. I can show you how wacky it is. I can show you. Give me a half an hour to explore what it is they're living for or why they are pro-life, and I will expose in there some sort of bullshit.
Right. He's the prophet, right? And I'm the elitist.
Well, at least in the sense that you're making a conversation that doesn't have to be narrow and for only a certain group of people. You're for some reason deliberately bending a conversation into that niche, so that makes you sort of an elitist. I'd also argue that you're sort of elitist in the sense that you will disqualify the suffering and say they don't count. I can throw them in my trunk and I can beat the shit out of them and I can force them on the ride they don't want to ride and all that shit because I can tell them that they're assholes for finding it offensive and objectable. They're the fools. I will tell them they are fools. And I will force them to live by my judgment. So, I mean, that's also sort of elitist. Why? Because you're a pro-lifer and pro-lifers are allowed to do that? Yeah. No.
Anyway, well, they believe in God. How can you, he says, how can you give worthiness, I suppose, to evaluation? Well, they believe in God, right? Billions of people. Well, I think that it, hearkening back to the principle of fallibilism, if you will, it oversteps the boundaries of rationality, I suppose, to say, well, one's evaluation contingent upon their belief in God is of no account, right?
I'm just saying that I've argued, I think faith in a God completely is incredibly corrosive to any kind of philosophical foundation. It will break their politics, it'll break everything. So yeah, it breaks all of their opinions, end up getting broken. There's not too many opinions that aren't broken by that faith in a God. Oops, that I didn't want to happen.
Their value, the 99%, I suppose. And here again, there's kind of irony that, Western civilization has become quite decadent.
A little bit of audio trouble here.
Even survival itself, largely superfluous.
Oh, okay.
And it may prove that...
Well, that's enough. So he does this little final thing, where he says, oh, well, maybe it's good, the efilist conversation. It's good for people to be critical and careful. So some of that idea is good. It's this left-handed kind of crap. Some of the arguments are valid, some of them. I don't know which ones. Well, I guess he's sort of saying which ones. The ones that are critical of how unwell we have done the human experiment, that we have fallen way short of our potential. I mean, we have this brain, we have this capacity to logic, and we, do silly, stupid, idiotic things and make horrible messes, and yeah, it's just really stupid. So yeah, that's the value, though. The value is in making, doing this Nietzschean make the human stronger thing. And it's just no. I mean, it sort of reminds me, the new Star Trek movie is just so bad. But they resurrect the Khan character, and it's such a Nietzschean kind of character. And yeah, just see how lost that character is. There's no purpose in it. There's no purpose in making, strong human to just be strong human. I mean, it just doesn't function. It just becomes a tool, a weapon, a monstrosity. Because yes, the thing that's we're always in trouble with is the hunger. Why? The why question. Why do we do something? And the fact is that we're not natively built with any good whys inside of us. The whys are always bad, and they're always, and even the good ones, the ones we call kind of good, like helping old ladies across the street. Most of the reasons why we do that kind of thing is, again, back to this hierarchy thing, back to this alpha thing, back to this integrity thing, ego thing. And so it's more or less a guilt trip that drives us to do the right thing. So it's almost, again, we're back to a negative force that's at the root of any positive action. And that's it's just, it's the mechanism. There's no other mechanism. You have to create the gravity well. You have to create the negative first. The negative is where all the energy comes from, all the power. And the positive is just the illusion, again, of, relative negative position. So you think you're doing okay because you're this far from the center of the gravity force. But the gravity force is the same. And all you're really doing is just calculating how close or far you are from the thing that's going to terminate you in the end anyway. Something like that. So anyway, till next time. Such. I hit the button. I hit the button again.